That's Patrick.
So all your friends, Zosie, coming live. You can only join Neuroccino if you're Zosie approved.
Approved.
Valentina.
It's a party.
Yeah.
So she's not at school, Michelle? She's
No,
It's because my teacher is positive.
your teacher.
I'm going to school just for tomorrow.
she was supposed to go back last Thursday, but the teacher didn't want to come back. She's too tired.
Okay.
And I'm positive.
And positive.
Tired and positive.
Hi, Ma.
Oh my God, Patrick. Oh no, it looked like he had a bun, but it was just a blurry image. Right, guys, my internet is not great, so I'm just gonna step back and let Leah run the show today. Enjoy.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steph. So, welcome everyone. As always, in Neuroccino, we are presenting here papers that bring us our attention, and we would like to share with the others and discuss the main points that we think are interesting. So if everyone has a paper that would like to present, you can share like the link in the chat box. I think Patrick, right? Do you have a paper? Okay.
Yeah, I got one paper that I'd like to discuss shortly. Just let me search for the DOI. So I send it to you.
Great. Here it is.
Okay.
Let me know if you can share the screen. Yes. Great.
Right. So today I've got something a little bit different than the typical paper to share, because there were quite a lot of studies that I felt like I could have presented, but this one really spoke to me as it's more of a potpourri concerning the future of human behavior. And it's timely in the sense that this is a special feature article for the 5th anniversary of the of this journal, Nature Human Behavior. So to celebrate the 5th anniversary, they asked 22 different leading experts in the core fields regarding their vision and their ideas or standing of the current state of their respective discipline. So as I said, there are 22 different small perspective pieces, but I just want to highlight some few so that we can that you still have something to read on afterwards. So for instance, let's start here with artificial intelligence, a small piece by Kate Crawford, where she highlights that since the mid-2000s, artificial intelligence obviously has raised in interest and expanded in the field of academia and industry, where typically some powerful technology is employed by corporations, but on a planetary scale. So despite the extraordinary technical innovations that she highlights, such as real-time language translation or predicting 3D structure of proteins, AI also concerns some more fundamental challenges, which I, for instance, did never see to that extent. So for instance, it all concerns the costs and consequences of AI. One thing that has been that the field has been working on is something that's called algorithmic fairness. So for instance, we know that some algorithms are prone to to better identify white males in contrast to people of color, for instance. But the second thing also concerns the cost of the human cost of AI. So AI, which I didn't know before, is sometimes crowd funded or uses labor of crowd workers who train AI systems for approximately as little as $2 per hour. And the third real challenge is the environmental cost of AI, which obviously concerns the high energy consumption and needs some strong regulations and new policy frameworks. So all these pieces are basically in this short presentation form. And so let me highlight some other few, such as Communication and Media Studies by Jean Burgess. So obviously we know that communication or language processing from a cognitive standpoint is a huge factor of human behavior and of information transfer between humans. But this information transfer is also a social ritual, so to speak. And obviously, one of the most important technological advances in this field has been the platformization of the media environment. So this form of us speaking or interacting basically over social media has has brought up new quantitative descriptions or studies, such as the description of hashtag publics in the mid 2010s, and also concerns like new connections between humanities and technical disciplines that will be necessary to move forward in this field. Similarly, a very somewhat related to that field is computational social science, which has newly emerged from leveraging computational methods and new technologies to collect and model and analyze digital behavioral data. So some foci of this has been the study of phenomena such as the spread of misinformation or the role of algorithms in creating misinformation. But given that this field is still so new, it somewhat appears to lack the, I would say, more basic questions of the quality of the data, accessibility of the data, validity, reliability. So what they, or what Claudia Wagner proposed, is to use these opportunities to establish privacy-preserving shared infrastructure, basically the same that we've got nowadays to more extent in neuroscience, where we're trying to share data across the internet via open access platforms. Second, it's also still missing the practices and scientific infrastructure for this kind of research. So the best practice approach or best practice papers that we all know about. And she also mentioned that there must be somewhat of a rethinking of the various ways in which the data is measured and has impacted social theories. Because not only are we obviously influenced by some algorithms and measurements, we are typically just shown what, like targeted ads, for instance, but we as users also influence them. So there appears to be a dynamic that is still not leveraged in this kind of research. There are other interesting topics here, criminology, for instance, behavioral economics, developmental economics, political science. And one that I'm obviously interested in, I'm most interested in, is cognitive psychology, combined with another piece here by Andrew Perforce, combined with another piece on cognitive neuroscience by Anna Nobre. So basically what these two pieces say is that cognitive psychology, for instance, as well as cognitive neuroscience, somewhat always looks at behavior in a closed environmental setting, where, for instance, here in this piece, we understand questions in a well-defined problem space within our experiment, but this neglects the richness and complexity of cognition in the real world. So to answer these challenges, to address them, they propose to go beyond experimental settings towards more naturalistic structure and stimuli, and ecologically more valid tasks. For instance, in cognitive neuroscience, we now have much focus on naturalistic viewing paradigms, such as movie watching, for instance. Second, they say that we must move beyond considering the individual in isolation, because we obviously live in a rich social world and environment and interact with other people. And this has mostly been forsaken in the core discipline of cognitive psychology. Third, we must also move beyond thinking about human minds as computers, because this comparison or metaphor always lacks the fact that cognition is intertwined with emotions, motivations, and our senses. So in order to make progress, Andrew here suggests to establish more reliable real-world data. So basically increase the access to data and access more data that's coming from real situations across people. And this obviously is challenged by privacy and data quality issues, which we already know about. And also this real-world data or big databases in this respect would also allow, in this case, cognitive science to move from their individual laboratories towards more collaborative teams, basically. And I highlighted this one as well as the piece on cognitive neuroscience because they felt so similar. Here it's also the same that in cognitive neuroscience, we typically see brain and minds embedded and studied in experimental tasks, where Anna Nobre also highlights that we sometimes fail to generalize to natural behavior within these experimental tasks, hence needing more of this naturalistic stimuli and more realistic experiments. In addition, she highlights that it's necessary for us academics to basically go out of our academic bubble, because while we are so proud about our data that we've got, the biggest players in data and concerning the richest data on human behavior really belongs to information and technology industries, as we all know. Hence, she highlights that we routinely interact with keyboards, telephones, the internet. Obviously, all of this is true right now. Right? So it might be worth to basically bridge this gap between industry and cognitive science to leverage the data that could have been offered here. Outside of, so obviously I also highlighted one piece by Maurizio Corbetta on neurology, but I wanted to use this as an last one. So in between, I also want to shortly highlight this piece on environmental studies. Obviously, climate change is one of the big issues of our time and more so in the future. And it felt a bit heartbreaking because Yasuko Kamayama, I'm so sorry if I butchered the name, highlights that climate change issues have been addressed for already or discussed in this community for already 40 years. So the last years, they had to spend time on proving the causal relationship between greenhouse gas concentration, global temperature rise, and extreme weather events. Although they did so, the general public invested little interest or seemingly little interest and expected these problems to be solved by experts and policymakers, which unfortunately has not been the case yet. He again highlights that it will become quite difficult now, or that our chances to constrain temperature rise to 1.5 degrees diminishes, and also highlights that we now finally seem to realize the importance of social scientific knowledge. So it's not only the experts that need to be knowledgeable in their field, but especially when it comes to environment, maybe we need some more information in our schools about it, or would have needed that, to say the least. But out of this rather dark and somewhat warning small piece, let me go to the last one I'd like to highlight by our friend Maurizio Corbetta on neurology, where he shortly says that obviously brain disorders are still a huge problem and costs millions of dollars, and that we now, to some degree, better understand that these phenomena are not the result of some local pathology, but more of widespread functional abnormalities, as you guys know and are certainly the experts about that. So one thing that he highlights is the treatment opportunity for circuit-based stimulation. But the thing is that these circuit-based stimulations still suffer from an issue because it's difficult to map circuits in single participants. Now he says that possible solutions may involve the assessment of behavior and physiological studies on brain circuits in individuals, leveraging multidimensional physiological maps of lesions that can then be fed to realistic in silico models. So basically stimulating, not only, but simulating brain activity on an individual basis based on information gained in multidimensional physiological fashion. And I basically, wanted to highlight some of these pieces just to get into a discussion. So I like this overview quite a lot because it really showed that all of these disciplines, despite their vast differences sometimes, really lack some core issues or core opportunities for development, such as interactions between disciplines, such as widening interactions between researchers, and so on and so forth. And I was wondering, like, what do you guys think? What are in brain research really the challenges we need to address as a community? So I hope I sparked your interest in this article. Obviously, I couldn't highlight everything, and the presentation has been probably a bit unsmooth for me, because this is something of a novel like paper I'm reading, so to speak. But what do you guys think? What's your impression? What are our challenges that we as individuals in research can address?
Thank you, Patrick. This was great. I also noticed this paper and really thank you for presenting it. So as everyone has questions, please, you can raise the hand. I was personally surprised about, yes, all these interaction, as you said, between like new technologies, informatics, and psychology, neuroscience, that it's like what we are also going toward in our small reality. So a really combined multidisciplinary group with different backgrounds to consider all these challenges that we have today. So I agree with the things that you presented. And sometimes I just wonder if we are now too linked with the technology. And so we don't have like, so that we are more adherent to the data than of new ideas, new theory. So sometimes I have this feeling. And I don't know if this is a limitation or a good thing, because we are stick to the data. So I'm always like, I came from that world, so for me it's normal. But sometimes I wonder that then our creativity sometimes is like limited to the data. But yeah, I think we need a balance between the two.
Yeah.
What the other things about? Michelle, yes.
Michelle?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And although like how work is to build up on data and observation theories, sometimes it's important to take it the other way around, because data are fundamentally biased. It's like, you know, in philosophy, you have this allegory of the cavern. If you stay in the cavern all the time, you don't know all the world that is around. And that's exactly it. And that's how, if you read like the literature from, you know, the 19th century, they figure it out despite having all the data and all the things that we can do that are extraordinary today. And that's just because they did like mental experiment and been carefully observing what they had, and they've been thinking a lot. With, you know, the advent of open data, I think we forget a little bit about thinking. We just apply kick-ass technique onto it, and then it become a little circular.
Yes, I agree. Like a critical thinking on the data, because if the data are biased, then we are also biased in results. Yes, I agree. Mar, you want to go?
Yes, I was going to say something related to the question of Pat, like our challenges. And for me, one of the main challenges, or one of them, is to be aware that the research has a big impact in society, and that we should use our research to reduce the inequality of society, like gender inequality, social inequality, because I guess that sometimes brain differences has been used as a way of justify gender differences or social classes differences. So I guess we have to be aware that our research is having a big impact in society, and we have the responsibility to use or this is my opinion, we have the responsibility to use our research to decrease inequality.
Yes, I totally agree. I don't know if Patrick has some comments on that, but yes, I also was when it was presented, I was thinking about the gender, also other kind of equality. Valentina?
I think there was someone else.
Okay, so go. It's correct, Gopal.
Yeah,
Go for it.
right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the paper, sir. Right. So my question or the concern was studying brain in the naturalistic settings, which was proposed by some of the authors in cognitive neuroscience. The fundamental issue here is that you take the control out when we are exposing or trying to study brain in the naturalistic setting. But at the same time, I'm reminded about the creative experiments done by Lorenzo in ethology, to get accurate results. Probably in order to solve the issues here in where we have to apply naturalistic settings and the brain functioning, we have to be more creative in to perform experiments. Certainly it's a challenge how we will reconcile both these aspects, but I think it's doable since people have done in evolutionary biology, for example. So yeah, that's my one of my ideas in the field. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe Patrick wants to comment this last one, since it's really adherent to the presentation.
Yes. So basically, I mean, naturalistic viewing has become quite a topic in cognitive neuroscience, I feel, because, well, I'm coming from a lab, or I'm currently in a lab where we utilize naturalistic viewing quite a lot, trying to basically get a more ecologically valid measure of brain activity with the goal of relating that back to behavior, and probably being better in relating it back to behavior than when looking at only like either experimental or closed experimental settings, where we can obviously look at one certain process quite well, but cannot model the vast majority of cognitive processes that go into moment from moment behavior. One strong proponent of these naturalistic viewing stimuli or naturalistic viewing itself is Emily Finn, for instance, who became quite famous for her paper on cognitive fingerprints or resting state connectivity fingerprints, where she showed that using the functional connectivity, we can somewhat identify individuals. So the functional connectivity is something unique to a person, right? But now imagine you want to relate this back to certain cognitive functions. You would typically need elicited behavior or elicited cognitive abilities, right? Elicited cognitive activity, so to speak. So it's the same argument that people have done for resting state. Like, instead of measuring 10 or 20 different experiments, or the brain activity during 20 experiments, you could take resting state and get an estimate of the underlying cognitive networks or functional networks in the brain. However, resting state is obviously more loose even than if I control the stimuli that I'm presenting, right? Because I don't know what my participants are actually doing in the scanner. And given that resting state now is more seen as uncovering the intrinsic, like low-level activity of the brain, so to speak, in the absence of, I'm sorry for that, in the absence of some tasks, we can find the networks in given individuals, but we don't know how they relate back to behavior or how they would act differently. So the idea here is to use naturalistic stimuli based on the assumption that all of us made different experiences, hence we'll have some form of other like variance in activations to better model the variance between individuals in cognitive measurements. Does this somewhat answer your question? I mean, your question was also more of a comment, right? Because you said, yeah, then we also need new technology or new methodological techniques to investigate such data. But that's exactly what we're doing. So much of the naturalistic viewing community also leverages machine learning, for instance, or leverages like complex GLM modeling of the data. So yes, it needs some different form of methods, but we're on that.
Thanks, Patrick. That explanation was perfect. Valentina, do you want to briefly say your...
Yes, I know, I have summed up. Yes, actually, just a comment that merges both the beginning of this discussion and the end of this discussion, because I wanted to refer to ecological validity, which is an issue that I've been studying since the beginning of my university career. And yes, it's great. We getting new technologies such as VR that allows for more ecological valid experiments. But also, as Patrick was saying, are we sure that what we're measuring is what we wanted to measure? And we should be really careful on ecological valid experiments. And I think that we should rather take a step back, reconsider our tasks, and focus more also on the control task, for instance, to be sure that we are measuring what we hypothesize to measure, as you were saying at the beginning, Leah. So on our ideas, on our theories, make them strong and look for what we really want to look for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the comment.
Yeah, that was great. A lot of things to do further. So thank you, of course, Patrick, for presenting. That was great. And everyone for joining and bring up the discussion. And as always, we can discuss the next paper the next Monday. Have a good week to everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.